In the heart of a dense and remote wildlife sanctuary, surrounded by towering trees and thick undergrowth, there lived a family of gorillas, watched only by the few who dared to venture into the jungle. The land was untouched by civilization, a place where the sounds of life spoke the language of survival bird calls, rustling leaves, and the distant murmur of the river. In this vast and isolated environment, every creature had its role to play, and the gorillas were the kingdom's rulers. Among them was Bongo, a 16-year-old silverback gorilla, whose strength and wisdom had earned him a revered place in the troop. His deep, intense gaze commanded respect, and every movement he made rippled through the forest as the other gorillas followed his lead. The dense canopy above kept the sun at bay, casting everything in a shadowy hue. But beneath it, the jungle was alive with the hum of creatures, the ground soft and uneven with fallen leaves, and the air thick with the scent of damp earth. A few days had passed since Bongo's troop had encountered a mysterious presence in the jungle. Initially, it had been nothing more than a faint rustling in the underbrush, a shadow darting between the trees. Yet, the deeper into the jungle they roamed, the more frequent the disturbances became. A low, unsettling growl had vibrated through the air one evening, sending the troop into a frenzy of suspicion. Bongo had remained still, his sharp eyes scanning the dense foliage, but even he could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. The presence was familiar, almost too familiar, but there was no mistaking the weight of an unfamiliar tension in the air. A few nights before, when the moon had barely risen, Bongo had heard the faintest noise, a soft rustle, a broken branch. Something large was nearby. A predator, perhaps, or something that did not belong to the forest. Yet, the jungle was a realm of secrets, and it kept its mysteries close. Now, with every passing day, the animals in the sanctuary were becoming restless. The cries of birds echoed through the trees more urgently than before. The howler monkeys, once bold in their calls, had gone quiet. Even the smaller creatures had vanished. No one knew what had caused the shift, but the air seemed to thicken, charged with an unease that spread like wildfire. As the days bled into one another, the troop grew more tense. Bongo's family was always tightly knit, bound by an invisible thread of understanding, but now they were fraying. The younger gorillas, once full of life and curiosity, huddled in groups, their eyes darting nervously to the shadows. Bongo, sensing the fear among them, grew more agitated. Something had to be done. His responsibility as leader weighed heavily on him, and he began to move the troop closer to the heart of their territory, away from the edges of the sanctuary, where the disturbances had been most frequent. One afternoon, as the troop rested in a secluded glade, a new sound pierced the stillness, a deep, unsettling roar, like thunder rumbling through the trees. The hairs on the back of Bongo's neck stood upright. His eyes narrowed, and without hesitation, he stood. The rest of the troop watched as he moved silently, almost as though the very forest itself had grown still in reverence of his presence. His massive frame disappeared into the thick underbrush, and the others followed, a careful, cautious procession. Bongo's movements were deliberate, measured, as though every step counted. The jungle, alive with its usual sounds of chirping insects and distant animal calls, now seemed eerily silent. The air had grown thicker, and the occasional crack of a twig beneath a footstep echoed like a gunshot. It felt as though the jungle was holding its breath. They approached the clearing cautiously. Bongo's keen eyes caught sight of something in the distance. His heart pounded in his chest as he watched, every muscle coiled with tension. Something wasn't right. The shapes were not like anything he had seen before. The moment they broke into the clearing, the tension erupted. A creature massive, with fur the color of twilight, emerged from the shadows. It was not a predator Bongo had encountered before, nor any animal from the sanctuary. The creature's eyes were glowing a faint red, and its presence sent a shockwave through the forest. A low guttural growl rumbled from its chest as it faced the troop. Bongo didn't hesitate. With a swift motion, he charged, his strength propelling him forward. The creature shifted, its massive form easily, sidestepping his charge. The silverback gorilla stopped short, surprised, before his chest heaved with a growl of his own. But then, a new sound emerged. A loud, guttural sound, almost like a roar, but human-like in tone. Another figure emerged, and this one was not an animal. A man, clad in the remains of tattered clothing, appeared in the clearing. His face was hidden behind a mask, but his presence was unmistakable. The man stepped toward the creature, a strange signal between them. Bongo froze, his heart racing. The animal, once again, turned to the masked figure, submitting to him in a strange and unsettling way. The connection between them was undeniable. Bongo's mind raced, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. This creature, this being, was not a predator. It was something else entirely. Something trained, something controlled. Suddenly, the realization hit Bongo like a bolt of lightning. This wasn't a simple encounter. This was a test. The gorillas were being watched, monitored. Someone or something had been orchestrating this silent game, pulling the strings from the shadows. The masked man extended a hand toward Bongo, an odd gesture of dominance and submission. The creature beside him stood motionless, waiting for Bongo's response. Bongo, wary, stepped forward. His silver fur gleamed under the faint moonlight, as his sharp gaze never left the masked man's face. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, the man withdrew, motioning for the creature to follow him. As they retreated into the shadows, the silence descended again, heavy, thick, oppressive. Bongo's troop remained in place, unsure whether to move or to stay. The jungle, once alive with its songs of life, now seemed devoid of sound. Bongo's heart hammered in his chest as he surveyed the clearing. His instincts told him something was wrong, that something beyond his understanding had just been set into motion. The weight of it settled on him, and he realized with chilling clarity that the jungle had been forever changed. The safety of their sanctuary had been breached, and the gorilla code that had ruled for generations no longer seemed enough. The creatures of the forest, the ones who had always roamed freely, untouched by the hands of man, would never be the same again. And as Bongo stood, his mighty chest rising and falling with each heavy breath, he knew that the true battle had only just begun. The days that followed were drenched in an uneasy stillness. The jungle, once a vibrant pulse of life, now seemed like a place suspended in time. The air itself felt charged, as if the trees whispered in hushed tones, sharing secrets too dangerous to speak aloud. Bongo's troop, though resilient, could not escape the weight of uncertainty pressing down upon them. The presence of the masked man and his strange companion had left a mark, one that seemed to permeate the very fabric of the forest. Bongo kept the troop close, their movements cautious, their instincts on edge. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves sent them into heightened alert. The deep growls of the jungle's usual predators no longer seemed like a natural threat. It wasn't just the animals that were restless. The trees themselves seemed to groan under the weight of some unseen force. Bongo, once confident and sure in his leadership, now found himself pacing more often, his thoughts clouded by an anxiety he had never known. His every instinct screamed that something far more dangerous than any creature from the wild had entered their domain. Something with the power to manipulate the very rhythm of the forest, twisting it into something unfamiliar and hostile. He could no longer deny it. The jungle was changing. The usual rhythms of the animals had shifted, and there were no signs of the masked man or the creature. But Bongo knew better than to believe that silence meant safety. The predator in the shadows was waiting, observing. One evening, as the last traces of light faded behind the towering trees, Bongo made a decision. His troop needed to move. They needed to leave the glade that had once felt like home and travel deeper into the sanctuary, where the presence of the outside world could not reach them. There, in the farthest corners of the jungle, He hoped to find some semblance of peace and security. The troop moved in a slow, deliberate procession. Bongo led the way, his keen eyes scanning every shadow, his powerful frame tensed in anticipation. Behind him, the younger gorillas followed, their senses heightened, their once playful nature replaced by an almost primal wariness. As they entered a dense thicket of trees, Bongo paused. The air had thickened again, and a low hum filled the space. Almost imperceptible at first, but unmistakable once noticed. His senses flared. It was a sound he had never heard before, a strange, vibrating hum. He motioned for his troop to stop, his posture alert and rigid. The troop obeyed, falling into a hush, their collective presence now nothing more than a whisper in the vast wilderness. The hum continued, rising in volume and intensity until it reverberated through the ground beneath their feet. The trees around them began to tremble, their leaves shaking in time with the deep pulse of the sound. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the hum ceased. The silence that followed was deafening, thick with the sense that something had changed irreparably. Bongo's heart pounded in his chest as he searched the darkness ahead. From the shadows, a figure emerged, the masked man, but now unmistakably visible, towered over the masked man, its features more distinct than before. It was no longer a blur in the shadows, but a massive being, its dark, slick fur rippling with unnatural energy. The creature's eyes glowed with a faint, eerie light, casting a ghostly reflection on the trees around them. Its form was impossible to ignore, as though it bent the very space around it, making the air feel thick with tension. Bongo's muscles tensed as he instinctively shifted into a defensive posture. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. There was a sense of recognition, but it wasn't from any creature he knew. It was something older, something from the deep corners of the forest where the mysteries were buried. This creature was not like any of the animals Bongo had ever encountered, no mere predator. It was something else entirely, something ancient. The masked man stood still, his back straight. He didn't move a muscle, his presence seeming to dwarf the entire jungle. There was an unnerving calmness to him, as if he had all the time in the world to play his part. Bongo glanced back at his troop. They were still, but their fear was palpable. The younger gorillas huddled closer to the older ones, their fur bristling. Bongo felt the weight of their gazes, all of them looking to him for guidance, but the answers he once held were now clouded by uncertainty. The masked man took a slow step forward, and the creature moved in tandem, like an extension of his will. The hum from earlier returned, low and vibrating, thrumming through the earth, and suddenly, Bongo understood, the creature wasn't just a being of physical power. It was a force that was manipulating the very environment. The trees around them seemed to bend in response, leaning toward the creature as if drawn by its magnetic pull. Then, without warning, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble violently. Bongo's breath caught in his throat as the very earth seemed to convulse, sending shock waves through the jungle. It was no longer a sound they were hearing, it was a vibration, a physical force, and it was growing stronger by the second. The trees above them cracked and groaned, their trunks splitting as the earth split beneath them. A deep crack formed, slicing through the dense forest floor like a wound. Bongo's senses screamed for him to act, but it was too late. The jungle itself seemed to have turned against them. The creature's eyes glowed brighter now, almost blinding, and the hum escalated into a deafening roar. Bongo's heart raced. He had to move. He had to protect his troop, but where could they go? The jungle was collapsing, its very structure bending and breaking. Every sound, every crack and groan, echoed the weight of something ancient and powerful waking up. And then, just as the ground beneath them split open completely, the masked man spoke for the first time. His voice was smooth, almost melodic, carrying with it an authority that felt like it could shatter worlds. "You've forgotten," he said, his eyes never leaving Bongo's. "This jungle has a code, a law older than your kind, a law you have violated." The words hung in the air, charged with an unfathomable weight. Bongo's heart skipped a beat. The forest had a code, a law. What was he talking about? Before he could react, the creature stepped forward, its immense shadow falling over the entire troop. The energy that pulsed around it felt like a suffocating pressure, as if the forest itself were being drawn into the creature's orbit. In that moment, something inside Bongo clicked. He felt it deep within his bones, an ancient connection to the jungle, one that transcended the bonds of family or tribe. He had never been just the leader of his troop. He was part of something far larger. And with that realization came the understanding of the code the masked man spoke of. It was a law of balance, of respect for the forces that governed the jungle. Something had been disturbed, something deep within the forest's heart. The jungle was not just a place of trees and animals. It was alive, a force unto itself, and something had stirred it into wrath. As the creature raised its massive hand, Bongo knew that the only chance to save his troop hand, the jungle itself, lay in a confrontation that would transcend anything he had ever known. With a roar that echoed through the very roots of the earth, Bongo charged, his massive frame barreling toward the creature. The ground trembled beneath him, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. In the heart of the jungle, beneath the cracking trees and the falling earth, Bongo would face the ultimate test of his strength and will. The jungle's ancient code had been broken, but the question remained, could he restore the balance before it was lost forever? In the final moments before the clash, a single thought ran through his mind. This was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a battle for the soul of the jungle itself. And as the creature's hand descended, Bongo's roar filled the jungle, a declaration of defiance and determination.